All right, welcome back, guys. So in our last tutorial, we saw how we can populate data into DynamoDB table using put dynamo and then put DynamoDB record. In this tutorial, we're going to cover how we can query those tables using get DynamoDB and then how we can get rid of some records, basically delete DynamoDB records. If you remember, if you haven't seen my previous story, make sure you go and watch it because there's a lot of stuff there that I've covered that I'll probably not cover in this one. So you remember we created a table and we populated with some records. We have two records with ID 123, 456 with a store key of John Doe and Jane Smith, which have different payloads. Now, let's go ahead and generate one action that will allow us to query one of those records. So first, what I'll do, I'll generate the flow file. This is just an empty, I would say, empty shell flow file. Because the get DynamoDB requires an incoming connection. Now let's go into this particular processor and let's go over its configuration. So this requires a table name. Basically, what's my DynamoDB table name? So if you see here, that's my table, very straightforward. The hash key name, basically the hash key name represents, if you go to the view table, this represents partition key set on your table. The range key name represents the store key of your DynamoDB table. And then we provided with hash key values. Like basically, what is the value of the ID you want to look for and what is the range key value you want to look for? Basically, if you put it in basic SQL, it'll be select from my table where ID equals 123 and name equals John Doe, basically. And then you have to provide or tell him, hey, what is the data type of your hash key and what is the data type for your range key? So I know that my hash key is a type integer or number and my range key is a type string. And finally, we get to the part that matters the most. What do you want to retrieve from that table? So you can retrieve everything that it's at the first level of your JSON payload, let's say, or your DynamoDB record. If you were to open one of the records and you look at them, say click them. So basically we have these three options. You can get ID, you can get name, or you can get payload. In our case, we're not really interested in ID or name, because we already have it. That's why we pass it on to him so he can return us back the payload. So we're gonna edit this value and say, hey, I actually want you to give me back the payload. So just type here payload. Next property here is how many items per batch you want to return. Let's leave it as one. Our region it's Asia Pacific Sydney, so that's going to change for you if you're not in Australia. And our credential provider services, which I went over in our last video. Basically, this allows us to communicate with our Amazon cloud service. And the rest stays the same. Let's apply. This has the get DynamoDB and processor has 4 outcoming relationship. One will be failure, when your flow file or action fails. Not found, basically you're running a query against the table and that item is not there. Success, where the item is found and particular key was retrieved. And unprocessed. Sometimes unprocessed might due to exceeding maximum capacity of the record or your service is throttling, you're making too many requests. So let's go ahead and run this get DynamoDB. So let's run it once. And you can see we have a success, thank God, to the demo god. Let's list the queue and see what this guy returns to us. First, we're going to go with the attributes. Nothing special here. For whatever reason, this particular processor does not capture a lot of information about the process itself and store it in the attribute. And now let's view the payload. So basically the payload is just content of the key payload. So if you look here, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 keys, and let's match it to our DynamoDB tables. We have 1, 2, 3, 4 keys. Great, so that worked as expected. Let's close this window. Now, let's move on to the next one. How do I delete one record? Basically, the delete DynamoDB record is very similar to get DynamoDB table. So let's go and explore it. You have the same setup, the table name, the hash key, the hash values, the region, and the credential provider. In here, the only thing that we're missing is the JSON attribute that requires to be returned because he doesn't really care what it's in the JSON attribute as long as he knows that he will have to delete a record from the table referencing the ID and the name. Basically, put it in SQL, delete from my table where ID equals 456 and my name equals Jane Smith. Let's apply this one and let's validate that that record exists. So we can see here that, yep, we do have 456 and we have name Jane Smith. Let's go back to our table, run this once again. And we can see we have a successful record run. Go back to DynamoDB table and make sure that's the case. And now you can see that the record was. So basically, to wrap up, how we can get a DynamoDB table, and that's how we can delete a DynamoDB table. These two processes, they have their limits. You can't delete multiple records in the same time. That's one, I would say, that's one of the cons of it. You will have to probably split and run individual records. You can't put like a delete from a list or something like that, but then you can adapt. You can do a split JSON and then evaluate JSON attributes and pass those values to it. If you guys like this tutorial, make sure you give it a thumbs up. Drop your questions if you have any comments. We also have a Discord channel where you guys can join and we can chat about this. And if you require help, I'll do my best to give a bit of my time to answer those questions. What I'll do, I'll place all these templates into my GitHub repository and I'll share the link in the description. So until next time, I'll see you.